so much for having me in Ecuador. Absolutely adore your country. I once worked somewhere where the first thing I was told was that here I had to prove who I was as a person before proving what it is that I was good at. And I feel like that's a pretty good way to start to talk about branded content too, because in its essence, isn't that what it's all about? Proving who you are as a company before proving what it is that you sell. The man who told me this was the founder and commissioner of the Entertainers Basketball Classic in New York, also simply known as Rucker Park. It's the most famous street basketball tournament in the world, and it's famous for having famous rappers and musicians own basketball teams. So JC has a team, Fat Joe would have a team, and then they would have their other famous musicians come and play, as well as NBA players. I ended up in this mecca of street basketball in 2010, not knowing how much it was going to change my life. I ended up working there for 5 years as the media director, working with brands in all shapes and forms to create events, partnerships, and most importantly, content. And just to give you an idea of how interesting and powerful a platform this is and how unique an audience it was, I'm going to show a little clip from a night where Kevin Durant, who's the famous basketball player, came to play.
Everybody's guarding them. All 5 of them. Everyone.
So before working at Rucker, I didn't really know much about branded content. I'm actually not even sure that it was a term that was being used as such back then. But I had worked in the industry for a few years with Omnicom, so I had been on the media agency side of things, exploring this new thing called social media back then. But I had yet to understand the power of brands tapping into already existing platforms. It wasn't until I saw how Nike, through sponsoring the tournament with clothes, had access to celebrities and athletes and access to creating content around that as if it was their event. And this is when I understood that this is a marketing tactic that has been around for a really long time, but that with the rise of platforms and in particular viewership, it has gone from being a marketing tactic to becoming the marketing tactic. But before we go further into that, I just want to discuss a little bit about what the term branded content means today, because it's still something that is splitting waters a little bit. So, as per definition, branded content is content that is funded or outright produced by an advertiser. I still think that is a little bit broad, so I'd like to add that branded content is entertainment resonating with consumers on an emotional level, okay? Might be a little bit fluffy still, which is totally understandable, so I want to play a little game with you. Watch this video for me.
Tension reached a boiling point today outside of a Trump rally in Ohio. What started off as... Protesters interrupt the Hillary Clinton speech in Iowa.
Donald Trump campaign finals.
Did you happen to dog out in the parking lot or anything? I'm trying to find his owner. He's really, really sweet.
Is he stray?
He was running with the leash, so he's obviously
really?
someone's, you know?
So-
We're looking for the owner.
So you're a Hillary supporter, are you?
I am. And I don't know if they're
Wait a
like
minute,
in line or...
Are you a Trump supporter?
And you are wearing,
Yes, I am.
Hey there, little fella. What?
So I'm sure you can all imagine how this ends. This was obviously created for the North American market. It's an interesting piece of content because it was connected to a certain point in time. The creative landed on our table just 4 days before these last two election rallies. So the trained eye will be able to see that there are quite a few production flaws in there. There's some focus issues, there's a little bit of shake, but it was indeed a piece of content that performed really well on social media. The big question is, though, is it branded content or is it an ad? And I'd like to ask your opinion. Who in here thinks it's branded content by show of hands? And who would consider it an ad? Okay. I was expecting a bit of a mixed review on this one, and it is one of those pieces that can be argued for both sides, and it's difficult to place. As per the definition we looked at earlier, I would say that it's leaning a little bit more towards traditional advertisement. Is it a great piece of social content? Absolutely. It's fulfilling a lot of the things that's needed for social to perform really well, but it's still leaning more towards traditional advertisement. We can talk more about that. Have a look at this one. The good thing about not speaking Spanish is that you don't know how much you're repeating, but I heard the title of this one earlier.
We're dying for some coffee.
Black coffee.
Americano's perfect for me.
I'm buying my coffee.
I'll take some coffee with cream.
I'm sweet and low. You're not drinking coffee if you're not drinking it black, don't you think?
No, I don't think.
Oh, you like to monkey with it?
What is this?
It's the most beautiful car in the world.
That is indeed Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, which is a collaboration between luxury car brand Acura and American comedian Seinfeld. It's a very simple format. He invites fellow comedians to go for a car ride with him and to go get coffee. It's hugely popular, and it has recently been picked up by Netflix. So by show of hands, who would consider this branded content? And an ad? Okay. This is quite a prime example of branded content. It's something that is created for entertainment purposes first and foremost, and therefore considered a really good case study for branded content. My third example is really important because it's important for me to say that branded content isn't limited to the film medium. It can come in any content form there is out there. It's just very natural for me to lean towards the film medium because that's where my expertise is. But this piece of content was created by the New York Times for Netflix when they were launching a new, series or a new season of their hit show, Orange is the New Black. So instead of writing about the show or the characters or the actresses in the show, they wrote about actual women in prison and what life for real women in prison is like, which is what the show is trying to portray, which created this natural interest for the show and was a really good piece of journalism as well. Who, you know the drill by now, branded content or an ad? Okay. There's a lot of discussions about native content at the moment and the journalistic, ethical obstacles that comes with that. But for now, this is considered really good branded content. So there'll always be those pieces in between, the one that could either be a really good ad or branded content. But I think that's okay. I don't think it's a space where we absolutely need to be able to categorize everything and decide what's what. What's important is that we think about creating something that people actually want to watch and engage with. Just to round this part off, this is an example that I'm sure a lot of you have seen referenced before. It is a prime case study for branded content. It's the Lego movie from 2015, which was brilliantly created for the target audience. So people were flocking to the movies to watch, yes, a great movie, but also ultimately advertisement. In that year, Lego sales increased with 25%. That's more obviously than after any ad campaign ever. And there are a lot of takeaways that you can take away from this particular piece of content, but I also understand that not everyone have the budgets of Lego. So if there's one key takeaway that I would want you to take away from that, it is to understand the value of putting entertainment first. Understand the value of putting entertainment first. I think that's common for all the cases that we've just looked at now. I want you to quickly think about how many ads you skip on YouTube every day. And then think about the last time you had a shopping experience where the person you were dealing with was just a really nice human being. I bet you bought more from that person than you would have if you were dealing with someone who went in for the hard sell. And that's because in this human interaction where you feel like you're understanding each other, trust is created. A brand that's really good at creating this level of trust is GE. So beyond the fact that they have some really important or some really interesting content formats, they've created this podcast called The Message, which is an 8-episode podcast about decoding a message from space. They're also using their website as an editorial platform where you can go in, you can read about industry-related news, you can read about life and work at GE, but you can't find any direct sales. And it's working really well for them in that space to create trust. So regardless of your marketing budget, it's this connection that we've now illustrated in the various cases that's going to be the fundament for creating really good branded content. It's products, i.e. what is it that you're trying to sell? It's value balance, meaning understanding which values it is that you as a company share with your consumers. And then it's understanding your audience's consumption. The first time I was really part at nailing this was in my old company when we created a multi-episode TV show for Brazilian flip-flop brand Havaianas. So the show was about life in the postos along the coast of Rio de Janeiro. With each posto comes a really different lifestyle, and everyone living in Rio, they're very attached to a certain posto. So in 6 30-minute episodes, you were following a person from each posto and their lives. And then the brand was very naturally integrated because a lot of it was taking place on the beach. But more importantly, the content was perfectly portraying the values of the brand. And then beyond that, it was distributed where the audience was spending the most time, which was on TV. I want to try and segue into how you yourselves can go back and look at your budgets, and then look in the mirror, and then look at your budgets, and then ask yourself, what can I do to maximize this money to create something that people actually want to watch? And I understand that it isn't as easy for brands as it is for human beings to create authentic content, because expectations are different, judgments are different, and responsibility is different. But those aren't good enough reasons not to try. So I'll try and give you a few, some advice that you can go back and discuss further with your teams. First of all, you need to start at the end. Regardless of what budget you have available, whether it's 300 or 3 million, you're going to have to make what you've got work for you. And you do this best by starting at the end before going too hard into creative and asking yourself, who is it that I'm talking to? So as a minimum, you need to ask yourself the following questions. Who am I talking to? Where are they spending the majority of their time? So which platforms do we need to focus on? On those platforms, what are the ideal lengths and formats? And if it's video, is it going to be watched with or without sound? You need to consider a lot of production questions at this point. And then perhaps most importantly, do we have a big enough following for this to be watched organically, or do we need to put paid media behind it? And beyond the point of maximizing your budgets, optimizing creative for distribution will benefit you in the end because a brand's effectiveness is largely affected by the format and environment the message is delivered in. And because distribution is so important, it might even be worth considering partnering with a publisher to create your content. Usually, brands see a higher brand lift overall when they do this. It can be for many reasons, but more likely it is because already established publishers have access to already established audiences, to pre-existing formats, and to talent. A really good example of this is this content series created in collaboration between Geico, which is an insurance brand, and Vice. It's based on the insight that Geico doesn't really have anything in common with the younger audience in terms of insurance. However, what they do have in common is maximizing your private budgets. So they created this series called Bougie Budget that was distributed on Vice's channels and performed really well.
The word bougie is derived from the word bourgeois, but bougie is a state of mind. Some people spend upwards of $100 on just 1 ounce of caviar. They're insane. Welcome to Bougie Budget, where we take pricey products and remake them ourselves for less. We all know that fancy dinners can be unnecessarily expensive, but they can also be delicious. Today, I'll show you how to impress your friends with a dinner party that seems way more bougie than it is. For my appetizer, I'm serving a balsamic caviar with fancy accoutrements. Your guests won't know this appetizer costs less than $10 to make. This technique is called molecular gastronomy. First, we take balsamic vinegar, then add agar-agar powder and bring it to a boil. While this cooks, let's go over some bougie talking points to pepper in throughout the night to keep your guests happy. They may ask, what brand is this caviar? Simply tell them everything is organic and locally sourced. They may ask, where'd you learn such an advanced cooking technique? Just tell them you picked it up during your travels. Allow your mixture to cool, then put it into a squeeze bottle. Slowly drop the mixture into cooled vegetable oil and let it settle. Rinse and serve on a potato chip with a dollop of crème fraîche. Now to round out the meal, you should pair your caviar with lobster tail, the most delicious part of the lobster. I've also made a cheese platter from my local cheese shop. Rare, rich, sumptuous, delicious, Dijon, decadent. Artisanal caviar? Now that's bougie. Created with Geico.
So those are actual advice. You could go home and make that yourself. Moving into creative, my probably most important point is to take the time it takes. Don't rush something into production if the idea just isn't there yet. It's going to be able to show in the end that the idea wasn't good from the get-go. I see this happening mainly for 2 reasons. One being that the creative is attached to a certain point in time, like the pedigree example you saw earlier, or 2, that the budget is attached to a certain point in time, so that X needs to be spent by X. I see those all the time. But regardless of what it is, it's just not worth it. And on that note, you need to remember that in the world of content, everything competes with everything. So your branded content competes with the content of actual human beings also creating brilliant content. So you're going to want to give it your best shot. There are 3 ways that you can avoid being in that situation. They may seem a bit obvious, but I'm going to say them anyway. One is to get creative help. It is to work with your agency partners or to get freelance creatives who are used to creating content if you're stuck. 1, listen to your peers. I kind of have to say this one is the production company, but if the director or if the creatives are questioning the idea too much, think about it and then have the guts to start over, have the guts to go back to the drawing board if it isn't there yet. And if you're an agency, have the guts to manage your client in a way so that they trust you're doing whatever you're doing to make them the best content. This is a little cliché-ish, but you'll know when you have the right idea. If it doesn't feel right, it usually isn't. And if it feels right, there's a good chance that it is. I know you're waiting for me to tell you how to go and create your own can line-worthy content. I can do that, but I can't do that out of context, but I can give you a few general advice on how to hopefully get there. Working with the right people seems like an obvious piece of advice. However, I see all the time that it is in fact the wrong people who are working on content. So you're going to want to ally yourselves with people who knows what they're doing, whether that is freelance creatives, whether that is you hiring the right people for your teams, working with already established publishers, platforms, or influencers. And this is something that can be done to any budget. This is a good friend of mine. His name is Phil. He has a decent following on social media, nothing too crazy, but he is one of the funniest, most creative people that I know. And I know for a fact that if he was to create something with a brand, he would create something brilliant. So there's loads of people out there like him. You just need to find them. Have a look at some of his content.
You've been struck by a smooth criminal.
Call it Swiss chocolate. How you doing, my brother? That's Swiss chocolate right there, boy. He's Swiss and he's black and chocolate. That's Swiss chocolate, my brother. Can I have right?
That's the lowest place on earth. Nancy.
It's called House Cream Spoon Style.
I'm super cold. My freezer deep. Look at that! Behind me! We out! Oh, dang! You all right, boy? I'll pick you up by your afro. You good? You okay?
Actually, Quebec in French is Quebec, and not Quebec.
Oh. Oh, the boy is strong, boy. I'm sure you some real muscle.
Buckingham Palace. The Queen lives there. Have you ever been there? I've never. I think that's the Queen. Long live the Queen.
Spring skiing, baby. Springtime. What's up, G?
So that goes on and on and on. If you have a bit more budget, you can also work with already established influencers. So there's some recently released stats by YouTube saying that 70% of teenage users say they relate to YouTube stars more than traditional celebrities, and that 1 in 4 millennials believe that their favorite YouTuber knows them better than their friends do. Pretty big stuff. I want to make a really important point on this topic, which is that if you do choose to tap into existing formats and work with influencers and and platforms that have already existing formats and ideas, please do so with integrity, with respect, and with purpose. You do not want to be the ones who misuse and abuse. It's not worth it. And when you get to the point of having your idea, it feels right, this is what you want to be doing, you've ticked off all the right boxes, you need to consider your brand recall. So what are all the ways that your piece of content is going to be remembered? What are all the ways that your brand is going to be remembered in this piece of content? There's this really famous example from Gatorade. They created an amazing cartoon based on Usain Bolt's life. But you could almost argue that the brand, that no one knows that it was Gatorade who made it because the brand is appearing so little. Now, for this particular case, I'm sure that they had their fair share of ROI. They had a lot of media exposure around it, but it's still a good case to look at when remembering that you need to make sure that your brand has a space in the content as well. Simon Sinek has this really famous example in his book from It Starts With Why. It's from the Oprah Winfrey Show in 2004, where she had a big giveaway, and I think maybe the majority of us have either seen the show or seen clips from it and remember her going, "You get a car, you get a car, you get a car." But no one remembers what the car brand was. The car brand was Pontiac, and they invested $8 million in that giveaway. So remember all the points that I've said in terms of putting entertainment first, putting the audience first, but then once you've done that, once you've made it good, you need to ensure that you make it yours. Every day, 600 years worth of footage is uploaded to the internet. 600 years worth of footage in one day. That means that everyone is out there creating and everyone is out there consuming, so there's no reason why you shouldn't be either. I want to end this talk by saying that branded content will only be your worst enemy if you don't do it. Thank you.